Hey guys, this is John, and I'm playing Move That Piece in the 15-minute pool on ICC. Let's open with e4 against Move That Piece. I am just going to check their stats. They play the Sicilian defense. Wow, lots of standard games played by this player. 16,600 15-minute games, peak rating of 2055. So they play c5, and... Okay, let's go for an Open Sicilian. a6 on move 2, so this is the O'Kelly variation. And it's well known that white should not play d4 in this position, because after d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, they can play e5. And that is advantageous for black because white does not have knight db5. I'll show that in the analysis. There's a couple good moves here. There's c4, there's knight c3, just kind of playing a developing move and postponing the decision to play d4. I think I'm going to go for c4. And maybe we'll get a bind position. So white having pawns on c4, e4. Possibly later I can push d4. Knight c6 makes sense. So I can play d4 now if I like. Let's do that. I'm out of book already, but who says we can't experiment in these games? So black pushes e5 anyways. I think I'm going to put the knight on c2. I like the fact that the knight is within range of the d5 square from here, so I can later play knight e3 to d5 is one idea. If knight f6, which I expect black will play, I'll have to decide between bishop d3 or knight c3. No, they played d6 instead, okay. Let's just play knight c3. Had they played knight f6 instead of d6, I might have been apprehensive to play knight c3. Actually, I could have played it because my knight on c2 guards b4. Never mind. H6. Okay, let's play bishop e3. I guess black wants to play knight f6 without worrying about bishop g5. So there is a point to that move order. Let's just play bishop e2. This position is reminiscent of the Sveshnikov variation. Bishop e6. Do I want to play an early knight d5? Knight d5 would threaten bishop to b6 followed by knight c7 after the queen moves. I could do that right now. And they would not be able to take with their knight because I can take back and forth these two pieces. So knight d5, bishop takes d5. Then I can take either with the c or the e pawn. Probably the c pawn. C takes d5, knight e7, let's say. Maybe knight b8. Let's wait one move before we make that determination. I'll castle, and assuming bishop e7, I might play knight d5 then. I could also pursue a simple plan like queen d2 and then bring a rook to d1, but d6 is well guarded by black for the moment. So I have a feeling knight d5 is more to the point. Knight d5, bishop takes d5, c takes d5, knight b8 probably. It seems odd, but the knight will come to d7. Maybe I can defend this pawn somehow. So say knight d5, bishop takes d5, c takes d5, knight b8, maybe bishop to d3. And then, let's say castles, I can try to play b4 and maybe grab some queenside space. There's also, like I was saying, queen d2 and just bring a rook to d1, but I think I'm leaning towards knight d5 instead. Yeah, let's play like that. And I think we'll see bishop takes d5 because, once again, bishop to b6 is something black has to be concerned about. You know, if knight takes e4, bishop b6, queen moves somewhere, knight c7 check, and I'll win that rook in the corner. It's possible they could castle, because then bishop b6 isn't quite as devastating. But I predict they'll take it, and they do. So take it with the c pawn as the natural capture towards the center. I don't think there's a good reason to play e takes, so yeah, let's take here, and I'm expecting knight back to b8. And here I was thinking bishop to d3, because this pawn is now under attack. I don't think I want to play f3 because while that does establish a nice pawn chain for me stretching from g2 to d5. I'm a little worried about knight h5 and maybe bishop to g5, looking to trade those dark square bishops. I think I'd rather play this and make sure my queen defends the h5 square so they can't play knight h5 so easily in a middle game. Now I was thinking b4 because I have a feeling black wants to plant this knight on the c5 square. So let's do that. They can perhaps play a5, but I can always play a3 and ensure that that pawn remains on b4. Nice to play e4 from time to time. I know I don't play e4 that much on my channel, but I view these online games as experiments most of the time. A lot of times I'm playing lines that I would play over the board as well, but e4 being such a good first move, you know, Fischer said best by test, I think it's good to try it every once in a while, even though I no longer play this move as part of my main repertoire. I used to be a 1e4 player as white up till the time I was maybe 2300 FIDE or so. I exclusively played e4. And then I started playing knight f3 on move 1, and eventually I started playing d4 on move 1. Then I even started playing c4 on move 1, so I've kind of come full circle. I've just found that d4 and d-pawn openings in general allow you better control of the position, whereas with e4, while it's just as good as d4, I mean, there's no doubt that both moves are of equal strength, you have to be ready for more types of positions after e4. The game, depending upon what black does, can become very tactical very quickly, as is the case in a lot of Sicilians, or it can proceed down fairly slow waters, like, you know, say a Caro Kann, or some line of like the closed Roy Lopez, for instance. And if you're playing a lot of e4 main lines, you have to be ready for lots of different types of games. Whereas d4, the games tend to be closed and semi-closed, and you don't get as many open fights if you don't want them. It's kind of a generalization, what I'm saying right now, but that's been my observation. So a5 is interesting because he's trying to knock out that b pawn so he can use the c5 square. I was thinking I was just going to play a3 against that, and I think I'll stick with that move. I think my knight is a bit misplaced. I'm not too happy about the position of this knight, but maybe in the middle game I can try to maneuver it. I mean, it might not be out of the question to play, let's say, black castles or something soon. Like maybe I'll play rook c1, knight a1, knight b3. b6 I'm not sure about. They really weaken that c6 square by doing that. That move just seems odd. There was no reason to play b6. I showed with a3 that I wasn't planning on taking on a5, so I don't know why they would suddenly do that. So if I take a5 now, if they take with a rook, I can play knight b4, and because they played b6, the c6 square is vulnerable. So now I'm thinking of switching directions and taking. What are some other moves? I could play rook c1, b5 gives up the c5 square, but I probably won't get a piece to c6. Again, if f3 is ever played, I think they're going to play knight h5. So I'm, in fact, thinking about taking. And say they take with the pawn, maybe then a4, looking to play knight a3 and into c4 or b5. Because I'd really like to get this knight doing something useful. It's not a great piece on c2 right now. The only thing is I'm not sure how great that line is. B takes a5, B takes a5, a4. I do give up control of c5. Probably they're going to have to spend a tempo castling. So let's say B takes a5, B takes a5, castles. Or sorry, B takes a5, B takes a5, a4, then castles. Knight a3, maybe rook c8. I see some moves I can bother them with, though, like bishop a6, maybe to attack the rook. Okay, that's good enough for me. I think I'm going to do this. I suspect they will take with a pawn. I can't think of too many other reasons why they would play b6 on the previous move. So my capture on a5 is purely a adjustment to that b6 move. Had black kept that pawn on b7, I would not be pursuing this plan. So castles, knight a3. Should this knight jump to c5, I'll probably chop it. I'll probably just take, and I like that c4 square. That's a juicy looking square for my knight. It would attack e5 and maybe force black to blockade with a move like bishop to d6. I'm still preventing knight h5 with my queen sitting on d1. Black's queen has trouble finding a good square too, because if it went to c7, I could always bother it with rook to c1. Okay, so on this move, I was considering taking. And I think I'm going to stick with that. Yeah, let's do that. And then probably knight c4. I can make an argument for playing the bishop to b5 and then knight c4, but I need this defended for now. So if I play the immediate knight c4, I'm attacking e5. Knight c4, queen c7 maybe? There's no d6 tactic or anything. Now I'm thinking I might want to wait on that move. Maybe rook e1. Or a move like queen e2, but rook e1 is my first thought. If rook e1, I wonder if knight e8 is in time for black, though. Because if they could play like knight e8 to d6, that would be their best possible piece. Knights are good blockaders of passed pawns, and I think if they can achieve knight e8 to d6, they'll be pretty happy. That said, I should still have some advantage even in that case. Yeah, I just think knight c4 will be met by queen c7. I want to get this bishop doing something. b5 seems like the square to go to. All right, let's play rook e1. If knight e8, I'll probably play either bishop b5 or knight c4. Let's look at knight c4 first, because that attacks e5. So knight e8, knight c4, queen c7. But in that case, it's sort of like, why did I play rook e1? Because if I know black's going to go knight e8, then was this move really necessary? Probably not. So I'm thinking bishop b5 is more promising. Let's say bishop b5, knight d6, bishop c6, hitting the rook, rook b8, maybe knight b5 then. Yeah, let's go bishop b5. And if knight d6, maybe I can even wait on bishop c6, like queen c2 seems reasonable. Overprotecting e4, attacking c5. Maybe there's a better time to play bishop to c6. Yeah, let's just go here. I'll try to move a little quicker. Notice the time differential. I don't think I have to rush with anything like bishop c6, knight b5, or knight c4. I'll just connect my rooks, kind of probe that c5 pawn. I feel like even if we trade knights, I should be for choice because of my protected past d pawn, and black has pawn weaknesses, especially c5. a5 and e5 are a little weak too. Okay, so they're indirectly defending the pawn on c5, because if queen takes, they could take on b5. Knight c4, knight c4, they'll just play knight takes c4. Knight takes b5 wouldn't be as good. Let's play rook b1. Do we want to do that? Queen c3 is another option. Queen c3 taking an eye on the a5 pawn and also e5. Let's play queen c3. Under 5 minutes from me. I do notice that Move That Piece has fairly low blitz ratings, so maybe they're just not as comfortable when the time starts getting low. This might be kind of their game. They play a little faster at the beginning in hopes of giving themselves time later on to think. That said, they're also not really active in the blitz categories I see, so it may be a long time since they played that. I like these positions because I could sit on this position forever. You know, if I don't want to play knight c4 and trade the knights, I never really have to. Hence, I can torture black for quite a while. Black's the one with all the weaknesses. And you can make annoying moves like queen c3, just probing like all three of these pawns, and just see how your opponent reacts. Much of over-the-board play and longer time control play, even online, is determined by the feasibility of playing certain positions. Like, I bet the computer would say that white has an advantage here, but it's probably not a huge advantage. But the fact that white can control the tempo of play, and there's little that black can do but wait, means that in a practical sense, white has a great advantage. One of the hardest things to do in chess is just sit there and do nothing. And I love torturing opponents when I realize that they have little else to do but just kind of submit to their fate and make passive moves waiting for you to do something. You can win a lot of games like that because your opponents will at some point just get sick of waiting and they'll do something drastic and lose the game even faster. Okay, queen c7, so possibly preparing to bring this rook over. So I can't take e5 for a couple reasons, knight takes b5 being one of them, also bishop f6. I'm thinking rook b1. Overprotect b5. Maybe knight c4. It's more feasible in the future. I'd like to play rook ec1 soon, but my e-pawn is still loose, so I can't do that yet. I think rook fc8 would be a fine move for them. Shift the rook over to the queen side, overprotect c5. I could try to play something like g3 and then h4 if I want to gain a little space on the king side. Putting some pawns on dark squares, take away the scope of this bishop a little bit. I don't think they should do something like f5, trying to strike at the e4 pawn. I think that would be rash. So say rook fc8, I might just quickly play g3. Now if I move this bishop away at some point, like say rook fc8, I were to play bishop c6, I would have to reckon with the possibility of rook b4. They might stick the rook on that square where it's protected by both of their pawns, and it wouldn't be favorable for me to capture because of that. So there is some benefit to black having the rook on b8. Okay, so they play this move. I was a little skeptical about this move and whether it's any good, but we'll see, I guess. I'm going to take it. And I predict they'll take with a rook. Because knight takes, just queen takes e5. So if rook takes, what do we have going on there? Well, they do take with the knight. Well, I just thought this was blundering a pawn because a queen takes e5. Are they going to go queen takes e5, bishop to d6, but I have queen e6 check, and then I can play something like g3 or h3? Can also play knight c4 right now. Knight c4, knight d4, queen takes a5, perhaps. Let's do that. Maybe I don't need to take that e-pawn. Because I think they're trying to get rid of it so they can play bishop to d6. And I do have queen e6 then, but I don't like that queen-bishop battery. I think that gives their dark square bishop more scope. This move looks good. It includes my knight, which was previously just sitting on the side of the board, just spectating. And I'm attacking a5 and e5 another time. Yeah, that f5 move is a great example of what I was talking about the feasibility of playing a position. I mean, like that move, it probably is an unforced error. Black just creates more problems than he needed to by playing that move, and now he's giving me extra opportunities. But it's so hard to resist moves like that when you're on the defensive. He should have just sat tight, I believe, but we'll see when we look through the analysis. Maybe rook takes f5 instead of knight takes f5 would have been okay for black. That's a possibility. I will have to watch this knight a little bit. Like if they play knight d4, I got to make sure I never blunder like knight e2 or something, but I don't ever see that happening. If knight d4, I'll take on a5 with the queen. Queen takes a5, knight takes a5. Then I can bring my knight into c6 at any moment, or back to c4 even. I've almost evened up the time. Yeah, not a lot of great possibilities for black right now. If they play rook a8, then queen takes e5, and if bishop to d6, at that point I can just take. Maybe they could take with the knight and try to blockade, but white's up a solid pawn at that point. Something like bishop to c6. I'm controlling the e8 square very well. c5 would be weak. Okay, so they play bishop f6 defending. So if queen takes a5, are you going to swing over to f7? Kind of looks like it. Still, I'll take. So queen f7, queen g6. Now queen e7 instead. Okay. Maybe queen a6 here, looking to play d6 or queen e6 check. d6 right away, there's knight takes d6. That's not working. Okay. Does my queen get at all trapped when I do this? No, I think it's all right. Let's do it. So if knight d4 guarding e6, I'm thinking d6 and then play queen c6 thereafter. Knight d4, d6, queen f7. Kind of got to watch f2 a bit. Rook f d8. Seems like black is not sure what direction to play. I mean, they're kind of switching from offensive moves like f5 to defensive moves like rook f d8. So queen e6 would just enforce a queen trade. There's also knight a5. Knight a5, rook a8, though. I like knight a5 because I'm directing the knight towards c6, but possibly it's not good right now. Let's trade the queens.
Check.
And then if knight d4, I can take e5 for one thing. Yeah, this pawn is now weak. weaker than it was a moment ago when the queen was defending it. Also, knight a5 to c6 could be a concern for black. Yeah, I don't see how black's gonna survive. Rook d5 would guard e5, but that move looks so awkward. I could play something like a5, just start marching with this pawn. Maybe they'll go rook d5, knight d4. Yeah, knight d4 instead. Could their plan be knight takes e5, bishop takes e5, rook takes e5, knight takes b5, a takes b5, rook takes b5? That's kind of nifty. I can't take because of the back rank threat. That's quite nifty. So maybe knight a5 instead. That was the other move I was considering. But knight a5, it's kind of an empty threat. f4 is another move I could consider. f4 pawn takes and I go e7. But f4 knight takes b5. I think I'll play that rook ending. Yeah, let's do that. Also, if bishop takes, I have e7, don't I? So maybe after bishop takes, I don't have to take back. Gotta watch my time right now. It's so easy to assume that you have to recapture, but yeah, in fact, if bishop takes e5, I just have pawn e7. So bishop takes e5, e7, let's say rook d to c8, e8 queen. Rook takes e8, bishop takes e8, rook takes e8, and I have f4 at the end. And that bishop is pinned. So they're going to lose it. If it captures f4, I take their rook on e8. Okay, so they're doing it this way. Can I play knight to c6 against this, though? I think I can. Yeah. So if this knight moves, we're taking b8. So a move order nuance. And if this rook moves to, say, c8, then we can just take on b5. I could also maybe take on d8, but I think I like taking on b5 with the pawn even better. Yeah, that should do it. I don't think black is surviving this. And our time is ticking down. I do believe that f5 was a mistake, but probably the way they followed it up could have been better. Like I was saying, rook takes f5 on move 25 seemed superior. There are a couple other things too. Okay, so here this just attacks the rook on e1. I think I could just take with my rook. I could also just move this rook. Maybe that's easiest of all. Just like come here, rook f1. Yeah, let's do that. Their rooks are still forked, and the knight on b5 is still under attack. Okay, so they lose on time. So let's go back and have a look. So this is the so-called O'Kelly variation, a6. It's a cousin of the Najdorf. And people who play a6 on move 2 will know very well that d4 is a mistake by white. It's a little dubious, because after c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, there's e5. And often white would like to meet e5 with knight db5, but I can't in this case. The pawn's already here. So say knight b3, and then black gets in bishop b4. And because black is threatening the e4 pawn, white's already forced on the defensive. This is no good. So hence after a6, why white usually plays either knight c3 or the move I played in the game, c4. I believe those are the most common moves. I don't know a whole lot about c4. In fact, I think when I was an e4 player, I used to play knight c3 here, but this move is reasonable, so just went for it. Knight c6 and then d4. And they played e5. I dropped back to c2. Yeah, I was talking about knight f6 as well as an alternative to d6. And then I was saying I might be hesitant to play knight c3 because of bishop b4, but of course that's kind of ridiculous. I could just take the bishop there. My knight on c2 guards that square. So had knight f6 been played, I would have just played knight c3. But instead, d6. I'm not sure about h6. I mean, in a sense, it makes it easier to avoid a scenario where white has a knight on d5. I think they're worried about, say they had played knight f6 instead, this followed by take, and then me planting a knight on d5. But it seems like black has made a lot of pawn moves this early. a6, d6, h6 now. So this happened. I castled bishop e7, and here I went for knight d5. Let's add the engine. Yeah, so it likes knight d5. And I was speculating whether black could just ignore this, so the computer seems to think so. So castles, and then if bishop b6, just play something like queen d7. And now knight c7 isn't as dangerous as it would have been on the previous move because black's already castled, so I'm not getting this in with check. It's not a fork. Rook c8, knight takes e6, f takes e, and black has a reasonable position. They've actually shored up some of their center squares by doing this. Yeah, so maybe black can castle right now. And in that case, I wonder if I should have played knight d5 on the previous move. Yeah, the computer thinks so. Maybe this is a little more accurate. I was trying to avoid them using the e7 square. So, like, I didn't like this. And the knight coming over to g6. Debatable whether I should even worry about this. The computer thinks white's still better, but it seemed superior to play knight d5 when they aren't able to use the e7 square. So knight d5, they took with their bishop. C takes, knight b8. Here I played bishop d3, just defending the e4 pawn, and now b4, so denying black the use of the c5 square. a5, I played a3. I think that's important because now that I've established this pawn, I don't want to simply take and allow black to recapture with something and maybe use the c5 square in the future. So a3, and I thought black should just castle right now, just get their king to safety. But they played b6. Maybe my remedy, b takes a5, isn't even best. This move just seems suspicious because, like I said, it's not consistent with what white is demonstrating that they want. When I play a3, I'm just saying I plan to keep the pawn on b4. I'm not going to take on a5. So I can't think of too many reasons for black to play b6 if white is not going to take on a5. Because all it really does is weaken c6. It's not like the enhanced control over c5 really matters, because they can't use that square with their knight when I have a pawn here. So the computer wants to do bishop to d2 followed by knight e3. That's creative. And maybe my knight is making way to one of these squares in the future. I didn't look at bishop d2 at all. Bishop d2 might also add some force to b takes a5 when it comes. And white is +2. That seems like an exaggeration. I wouldn't look at this position and say +2 for white. I would say it's better for white. I have more opportunities for my minor pieces. That kind of is what it boils down to. Like, these pieces are hard to activate for black, whereas I've got some nice squares already for mine. And I think that b6 move really weakens those light squares on the queen side. So instead I took and then played this a4 move, which also seems pretty good. And then bringing the knight over to a3. Knight c5. Computer thinks knight e8 is worth considering. That might be decent because knight e8 is a part of black's plan anyways. Once they play knight c5 and we swap, they want to get that knight to d6. Also maybe bishop g5, looking to trade off those dark square bishops. Yeah, I could see knight e8 being a decent move. That might be more sophisticated than just playing knight c5 immediately. Because after knight c5 immediately, I know I'm going to have much the superior pawn structure. These pawns do not impress for black. They require constant babysitting, and c4 and b5 are weak. I have a feeling I could have played it better right around here. Like rook e1, especially in view of black's next move, knight e8, could be a loss of a tempo. And long term, I don't think I really want my rook on e1 anyways. You know, I was expressing some regret later that I couldn't get the rook over to c1, for instance, when the battle started shifting to the queen side. That said, though, I mean, the position is a little slower. I don't know that one move is going to make a huge difference one way or another. I thought about knight c4, but I just thought they would play queen c7 and defend. And I'd really like my bishop on b5 when my knight's on c4. I want like this position versus this. So rook e1, knight e8. Now bishop b5, knight d6. I just played queen c2. So black never wants to take my bishop, because after that, I could take either way. Yeah, let's say take with a pawn and then plant my knight on c4, and my knight is going to dominate this poor dark square bishop. This bishop has no scope. I mean, its only role in life will probably be to come to d6 and play defensively, but that's not what you want for a bishop. A black knight would be much better suited on that square, not a dark square bishop. So rook b8, I played queen c3. Rook b1 is more accurate according to the engine. And here f5 was decent. They played it on the next move, right? Queen c7 and then f5, okay. So it's better here. Why is that? So if take, rook takes, white still has an advantage, but maybe the possibility of the bishop coming to f6 and kind of trying to skewer me down the a1, h8 diagonal is on the table. Queen f8 could be another idea. Double up and attack the pawn on f2. Black hasn't committed the queen to c7, so they might have more mobility to play the queen over there. So it's possible f5 is not all that bad. It just needs to be timed correctly. Yeah, I kind of see why queen c3 is a slight error. Would have been better to play this move. So they played queen to c7, and I can't take on e5, remember, because of knight takes b5, attacking my queen and also defending black's queen. And also, a lot of times I'm running into bishop f6 too. So I just played rook ab1, and here c4 is a potential pawn sack that black could consider. I saw that move. I don't think I mentioned it, but I saw that this was a possibility. So I think they'd be hoping for something like, oh, not even take here. Okay, take here. Ah, and bishop b4 is coming next move, regardless of how I take back. That's sneaky. Yeah, that didn't occur to me that I might have an alignment problem with the queen on c3 and the rook on e1. Very sneaky. Okay. So once again, maybe I was underestimating black's counterplay a little bit. c4 would be a good move, especially if I can't take that pawn. What if bishop takes c4? Well, I'm in a pin right here. This looks pretty awkward. Rook takes b1, rook takes b1, knight takes e4, and black is much better now. Yeah. The tables have turned. But they went for f5, and I took. Queen takes e5 is a possibility. Didn't consider that move either. Why does that work all of a sudden? So if take, I'm going to check on e6. Ah, okay. So knight takes b5 was the problem previously if I took on e5, but here, since there's no pawn on f7, I could actually check. And after they block or move the king, then take. And white is just crushing after this. What if something like fe? Now knight c4, pin this knight. This is also good for white. Well, I just took. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they should take with a rook here. Rook takes f5 instead of knight takes f5. And I wasn't entirely sure what I was going to do. The computer says play knight c4. And what if knight takes then? Bishop takes, threatening d6. So bishop d6, rook takes b8, queen takes b8, queen takes a5, bag a pawn. It is opposite colored bishops, but yeah, I think white might have the slightly better bishop compared to black. I would have been okay with going into this. But still, rook takes f5 should be played. I think this knight takes f5 move is too loosening. the knight leaves the blockading square, and yeah, knight c4 seems to be a good reply. This was also tempting, but I think bishop d6 is the point. And then they're skewering my queen and the pawn on h2.
Check.
I could give a check, but after the king moves, I'm going to have to play some sort of defensive move. And if I play like g3, I wasn't sure, like maybe they could take on g3 even, or, oh yeah, this move too. Attacking the queen and also threatening knight f3 check, forking the king and the rook. But knight c4 is a great move to hold off on taking the pawn and also introduce a new threat, queen takes a5. Yeah, I think it's becoming difficult to defend for black after this. They just have too many weaknesses. Here, queen takes a5. Probably queen f7 had to be played. I thought that was their idea, maybe trying to get the queen over to g6 and muster up some threats against my king. But they went queen e7. I played queen a6. Here, yeah, again, this looks a little disjointed compared to how they played it. Like f5, I think they should be more aiming for counterplay on the king side and trying to use the open f file, but they're switching to defense, and that's just not going to work when you're down a pawn and you have a weak structure like this. Yeah, so something like knight d4 was probably the last chance, controlling the e6 square. I was planning on playing d6 and then queen f7, and then, oh, I can't go to c6. Huh. I was under the impression I could play queen c6. I'm not sure in this exact line if I was thinking that, but yeah, their knight clearly controls that square. Fortunately, knight d2 is a good move. Okay, threatening bishop to c4, skewering. Also, maybe my knight can come to e4 and hold the f2 pawn. But after rook f to d8, I think it should be straightforward. I trade the queens. Then e5 is weak. e7 is a constant issue. Knight here. Yep, and take. And the line that I was originally calculating was bishop takes e5, rook takes e5, knight takes b5, a takes b5, rook takes b5, exploiting the back right weakness of white. I cannot take their rook because of rook d1 with mate to come. But all of that is irrelevant because after knight takes e5, bishop takes e5, I do not have to take back. I can play e7. There was a chess cognition episode where I was analyzing a game I played against Grandmaster Alejandro Ramirez. And in that game, I made a piece recapture that looked routine, but it in fact overlooked a big opportunity for me. And that's the type of thing you can fall into. You can miss opportunities because you are so used to, in your calculations, anticipating captures and recaptures. So it's important on bishop takes e5 to realize that you don't have to immediately take back. I can play this move instead. Then I'm threatening the rook, and I'm also threatening the queen, and the bishop on e5 is still weak. So that's just winning for white. So they took here, and I do not have to take this back, because if I take it back, it could transpose to that other line. Bishop takes e5, rook takes e5, rook takes b5. White would still be up a pawn here after something like, I don't know, rook c1 or rook e1, but this is not what I want, going into a rook ending. So yeah, once again, I do not have to take back. I can play knight c6, and should this knight move, b8 is falling. Yeah, and now black was running out of time, and there's no solution either. Yeah, and they resigned. I don't have to cash in on any captures. They played bishop c3 attacking my rook, but it's sufficient just to move the rook away. Because as soon as this knight moves, I'm taking b8. I guess I could take either way. Yeah, even this way, because after knight takes c6, rook takes d8, knight takes d8, I have e7, and this pawn is queening. Okay, so this was a interesting strategic game. I think black's problems started maybe even early on when they played h6. I'm not sure about this whole setup for black. I kind of think that white has better opportunities to use some key squares like d5 and the weaknesses on the queen side. My bishop will be well placed on e3, monitoring that b6 square. I think h6 is an inaccuracy, but I think especially that b6 move right here on move number 15. I do not like that move at all for black. They should just castle, something like that. b6, there's no reason to play that. And it allowed me to use my knight aggressively and Then they constantly had to think about me occupying the c4 and the b5 squares, and black was pretty passive. Looks like the f5 counterplay was reasonable for black, but it had to be timed a bit better. Okay, hope you guys enjoyed this game. I'll be back tomorrow with another video. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.